process.
Okay,
I'll ask you
great.
about that. We see what's right. Anyway, it's gonna be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about it.
We are a go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is IDAGIO Live, the place where classic music happens, as you well know. And you know, it's been happening for me here on IDAGIO for quite some time. We started this the end of March, and I don't know what number this show is, but it's been really wonderful every Tuesday to share with you my passion about the world of song. We've had several different kinds of shows over the last month, and starting in September, the Hampson Foundation, my foundation, which is about song and cross-cultural communication, we partnered now with IDAGIO, and we broadcast live on the Hampson Foundation Facebook website, as well as creating a continual library on song with the IDAGIO Live for what we hope will eventually be a learning platform. That'd be kind of fun. Could be a lot of fun. And we decided to go back to one of the great projects that the foundation did, which was a collaboration with WFMT, Chicago radio network, and produced two different shows, 13 weeks. One was Song of America. It was the history of American culture seen through the eyes of our poets and the ears of our composers. And it was so successful and made so much sense. I just thought, why can't this work in a general sense for song, even in the known leader or European world? And that became a really extensive and fun project. We asked several different authors to join us. And that was essentially from 1815 to modern times, the same thesis, letting poets and composers tell us the historical developments and perspectives historically through the 19th and into the 20th century, meaning that song, classic song poetry, which doesn't need music, and music which doesn't need poetry, but making a song cast actually is a wonderful, if not one of the closest identifiers of any particular epoch, of any particular people, of any particular culture at any given time. And that was also hugely successful. Both of these shows live in their entirety on the Hampson Foundation website. And in fact, we have made a German version with the SWR, Südwestdeutsche Rundfunk in Baden-Baden, first the Liedspiegel der Welt, or Song Mirror of the World, and I am now just starting and not quite halfway through the Song of America project as well in German. Big success, a lot of information. People are quite enthusiastic to understand the flow of nature of composers in a historical timeline and concept. And that's why we have this wonderful guest this evening, because Stephen Rodgers is really one of the great brains behind tying up all of these cultural, historical perspectives as they become evidenced in song, especially in the early 19th century. Our program together was Fascination with the Modern, which kind of kicked off from Berlioz and went on. I'll let you explain that. But Stephen, welcome to the show. It's great to see you. If I may, I believe this is the first time we've actually seen each other, isn't it?
It is the first time. I remember when we were putting together the program, we were scheduled to have a FaceTime call.
All right.
And I think you were performing Wozzeck at the Met
right.
and got sick. And so at the last minute, you weren't able to make it. So we didn't get to meet until, gosh, just a couple of days ago.
That's right. Personally, we had some correspondence. Oh, yes, the Wozzeck. That was a wonderful project. But in fact, I did get one of those nasty New York bronchitises, tracheitis, whatever they call them, just before the premiere. Never mind. Let's not go down that memory lane. Let's go down the project memory lane. When did we do this? What was it, 2008? No, 2014.
2014, 2015. Right. I think it came out in 2015.
And when we came to you for this, to make a radio script based upon what we knew as your, great work and great musicological studies, and of course, you came enormously, completely unadulteratedly recommended from our most esteemed colleague, Susan Joens, which helps a lot. But was it something unique to try and make a script out of this?
It was a great experience. I think that probably the reason you thought of me, in addition to the fact that Susan had spoken highly of me, is that I'd done some work with Berlioz, and Berlioz's songs played into the program. But I remember actually, I think I sent the first draft or an idea that was a little narrow, and you came back and said, let's really broaden this thing. And so I ended up talking about Berlioz and Stephen Foster and Donizetti and Fanny Hensel and Clara Schumann and a number of other composers who I hadn't thought to talk about initially. And so it really expanded my mind to broaden things in that way.
What I remember reading the first script from was actually, and that's why I wanted to buy it, because you took me through a couple of channels and you went, and look who's at the middle, Shakespeare. And I went, oh yeah, this is, yeah, let's go there. And so our concentric circles were really, really quite a fun. It was a wonderful show. It was wonderful to read in, and a lot of associations that people wouldn't necessarily think about or get. And that's kind of the fun part of these shows, or those shows, those radio shows, which I really encourage everyone to go and listen to. And by the way, just go to the Hamsong Foundation.org, O-R-G, and we'll show you how to get there. It's not you know, they're all sitting there and you can listen to them in their entirety. You can see what records we referenced. You can see all the, you know, digital artifacts behind it. We can do a job. By the way, in all of those programs we've done and have been functioning as a foundation, I have had exactly one, and very tenuous, concern that what we made available in the public had some sort of copyright jurisdiction. And I only mentioned that because I immediately wrote back and said, you know, we've taken off, but here's why I did it, and here's why we have it. And he wrote back and said, good to go, it's fine. But in all those shows, especially 26 shows and 22 authors, we've had absolutely not one not just complaint, but concern that the way we reference musical digital artifacts is of anybody's concern. And that is valid to this program, because we're going to go into the IDAGIO.com platform, which of course is very exciting, that you can actually use the IDAGIO.com platform for any kind of documentary very easily. And I'll show you how we do that. But it's, you know, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a learning curve for all of us. But thank you for being part of the travel. My goodness.
It was a great experience. One thing I loved about it is that, you know, academics are often writing things, you're writing for a small audience, and right, you're maybe writing like, you know, a 10,000 word essay. And this was really fun because it was really collaborative from the get-go. Yeah. And it involved making things shorter and tighter and sharper. And I learned a lot about doing that in my own writing. And I think most things that we write tend to be better if they're a little shorter. And that was certainly the case with this project.
Are you saying that musicologists are long-winded?
No, I've never written something that's 6,000 words longer than it needs to be.
Whoa. Well, I remember we are kind of on the desktop is you're writing a story for somebody driving down I-95. You know, not a time for weeds, just make them want to keep the radio on, not because of the numbers, but just make them interested in the subject. And you were wonderful. You adapted. It was wonderful, beautiful. Where are you called? Where are we talking to you from? How did you get where you are? What do you do? What's your day job? Let us know a little bit something about you.
I am talking to you from my home office in Eugene, Oregon. I teach at the University of Oregon, and I've been teaching here for 15 years, unbelievably. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Iowa and went to a great small school in northern Wisconsin called Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. Really wonderful music school, and had a terrific experience there. And then went to graduate school on the East Coast and did what everyone does. I littered the country with job applications and crossed my fingers, and was really lucky to end up in the Pacific Northwest. And I know that's sort of your stomping ground.
My heart's going like this, of course. Pacific Northwest, ladies and gentlemen, that's Oregon, Idaho, and of course, the crown jewel, Washington State.
Of course. So no, it's a lovely place to be. I'm really happy to be here. And, you know, I took a kind of long course to music theory. I think when I was in college, I didn't even know what music theory was. I was the kind of student who, I was always changing my major. I was a French major for a while, a theater major for a while. I did an art major for a year. My friends actually made me a wheel of majors that I could put on my door and just spin at will. But in the end, I settled on music. I have always been a singer, and I did a lot of composing. And it was actually I ended up with a music degree and an English degree. And it was through a literary theory class, of all things, that I had this eye-opening experience. And I realized, oh, I can do with music what I had always been doing with literature, sort of interpreting it, trying to understand it, trying to understand why it moves me the way it does. And that class, that single class, made me realize that a career in music theory, which prior to that point I thought was really, part writing and Roman numeral analysis, something very, very narrow, that it could be very broad and expressive. And that headed me down a path to doing music scholarship and writing about music that I love.
Now, music theory, I think all of us that went through any kind of music education, for most of us, especially performing majors, music theory is like the oh my God fach. So,
exactly. Well, that's the way it was for me. And one thing I've realized over the years in teaching music theory is that for me, music theory is about trying to understand music better. And what that means is, for me, understanding why it moves me the way it does. It always starts with some kind of visceral, emotional reaction to a piece of music. And I'm dying to understand what's happening to create that emotional effect in me. And that's the way I try to teach it. And that's certainly the way I try to write about it. And writing about such wonderful repertoire as art song in the 19th century, it's hard not to be deeply moved and want to understand what's happening and how can I communicate some of that wonder and expressiveness to a wider audience.
All I can say is I hope your students know how lucky they are.
I'm lucky to have them for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, what do you in your spare time and what kind of hobbies do you have? Do you like to hike or play golf or tennis or
well, it's hard not to like to hike if you live in this part of the country. So getting outdoors, walking, hiking. I like to, this is kind of related to my day job, but not really a part of it. I like to write music. I write songs. I have 2 kids. I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I write songs for them. I write songs for my wife. So I do a lot of, and they don't sound like Fanny Hensel songs. They're a little more, even more accessible than that. So I write music. I love to read. I've always loved poetry. And so what's that?
More like Carrie Jacob Bonds.
Yeah, perhaps a little, sometimes a little more like Billy Joel, honestly.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
But I like to write music. I like to read pretty widely. And I like to kind of keep myself abreast of things that aren't just music theory, because it tends to kind of feed into what I'm doing, whether I realize it or not.
So in music history, your passion is not just the early 19th century, but actually you're pretty focused on women composers as well. Is that true? And in your day job, as we call it, and working, I mean, is part of your position there is that you're allowed to do research and write? Is that the idea as well?
Yeah, it's a research one institution, as they call it, which means I'm expected to do a lot of research in addition to teaching. And the thing that I am most obsessed with lately is music by women composers. And it's something that I kind of happened into accidentally. I didn't decide, I want to write about music by women, so I'm going to find music by women. I found music I loved rather accidentally. It happened to be Fanny Hensel songs, and thought, what is this extraordinary music? And was immediately drawn in, and then discovered that it hadn't been written about much. And in fact, many of her songs are not published and weren't available, and there were not many recordings. And that then headed me down a Fanny Hensel path. And since then, I've been writing on Clara Schumann, who also was a really gifted songwriter. And right now I'm teaching a class for graduate student performers on art songs in the 19th century by women from many different countries. So I ended up happening into this field and of women composers. And since then, I feel really moved, and I feel that I can shed some light on music that has not been explored as much, that I can explore some hidden gems that deserve more attention. So that really does drive what I'm doing.
It's one of the great silos of the work of the Hampson Foundation, one of my passions. My 2 biggest passions coming through the Song of America project is the general huge canon of African-American creativity in America, which is still woefully, embarrassingly unknown, and what is known as cherished. That's at least the good news. And the other one is women's creativity, which I think is a very complex subject in America. I mean, when you think of all the good that has actually happened and how we seem to be such an open culture and community or society, we still don't have an equal rights amendment, And when you, in the Song of America project, I used to, this whole Star Spangled Banner series or the story is quite remarkable, and the tune is, of course, from the early late 1700s, but there were many, many broadsheets, they called them, different texts on that melody. And in fact, well over 200. And that is one of my next shows down the way when he wants to. Mark Clegg at the University of Michigan is finishing up his book on the ultimate and final history of the Star Spangled Banner, which is a fascinating tapestry of American history as well. But not to digress, but the point is, even in the 1840s, you had suffragette conventions, women deeply determined to get the vote, and they wrote texts, and I read them in the SOA program of to the tune of the Stars Banner, and pretty moving stuff and pretty powerful stuff, and but brings me to the other side. I've done a couple of shows with women composers and about women composers, and one of the titles I like the most about this subject is There Is No Gender in Music. So I always feel somewhat proud to be informed, but somewhat guilty to talk about great songs as if they're greater just because they're written by a woman. But on the other hand, the obscenity of not liking a song or it's not known probably because it was written by a woman. I mean, we get caught in the middle of that. Any of that resonate with you?
It's a challenge. I think one challenge that people who write about any underrepresented repertoire is, do you sort of put it in a box and say, this is, women's music, or music by Black composers, or music by LGBTQ composers? That taking that approach has the benefit of shining a light on that repertoire, but it can also tend to remove it from the larger conversation, from the larger canon. In my case, from the analytical tools that we use to explore composers like Schubert and Robert Schumann. And so I prefer to treat these composers, Clara Schumann, Fanny Hensel, as composers first and foremost, people who wrote beautiful music that needs to be studied carefully. Now, of course, you have to consider their gendered identity, their circumstances, who they were writing for, who they couldn't write for,
right.
When they could publish, when they couldn't publish. All of that has to inform the way that you make sense of their music, but it's still music. And I think it needs to be, as a music theorist, and music theorists like to analyze things, I feel that one small thing I can do is attend to what makes this music amazing, right, and treat it as, in a way, elevate it by treating it as music first and foremost, without denying the really important contexts that surround it, which have to do with gender. So it's complicated, in short, but I think there's benefit in focusing on the music and trying to understand what makes the music so wonderful.
And I think that the women composers that I know today, in fact, a couple of them have written very beautiful things for me. I think that's exactly the shake they want. That's exactly what they want. It's not about being a woman. It's about a wonderful composer, and yes, he is a woman. And anyway, let's move off. Let's move on to now. Fanny Hensel. This isn't Fanny Mendelssohn, is it?
Yeah, well, it is Fanny. She was born Fanny Mendelssohn, and right, she's, for the longest time and still today in some circles, she's best known as the sister of a famous brother, the famous brother being Felix Mendelssohn. She was married. She married Wilhelm Hensel, and then for the rest of her life, she went by Fanny Hensel geboren Mendelssohn Bartholdy. So the name that she used, it's a bit of a mouthful, was Fanny Hensel, and then also Mendelssohn Bartholdy. She didn't refer to herself after her marriage as Fanny Mendelssohn, which is why most people who write about her music call her either the full name I just said or Fanny Hensel, because that's the way she referred to herself. But
isn't there a significant amount of songs that have been attributed historically to Felix Mendelssohn, even before she was married, as she was as functioning as a sister in the family, whatever, that very likely were written by her and they were published under his name?
Yeah, so there are two song collections that are by Felix and only his name is on them. They happen to be Opus 8 and Opus 9, and they contain some songs by Fanny. And when they were published, if you were in the 19th century, if you bought these things and played them on the piano at home, you would have no way of knowing that these weren't all by Felix Mendelssohn. But again, the story is very complicated. With one of those opuses, we know that she, Fanny, had the primary job of picking songs to put into this opus, her songs and her brother's songs. So the idea that he stole her songs or tried to kind of
I've heard that.
Put his name on them is not true. But listeners in the day would not have known that they were her songs. Her family would have known, her close friends would have known, but the wider public wouldn't have known. And that's why she labored in the shadow of her brother for so long. And we can get to this. She didn't actually start publishing her music until shortly before her death. So for the longest time, the only people who knew that she was writing music were the people who would have heard the performances that she had in her home, which were big, but technically private performances. So she was not a public musician.
What else did she compose? Was it only songs?
No, she composed almost 500 works of music. She composed a string quartet, many songs without words for piano. She composed an oratorio, a cantata, an orchestral overture, but the bulk of her output is song. She composed 249 songs.
Oh my goodness.
It's not Schubert, right? But it's a lot of songs. And she even said that
it's as many as Massenet. Massenet,
exactly.
258. I don't think Strauss made much more than he might have been up towards 300, but I am not so sure. I'd have to look at that. I mean, 250 is a normal large catalog. You know, there are exceptions that are extraordinary. You know, and certainly Schubert probably takes the cake with well over 600, but nevertheless, and you know, quantity doesn't matter. That's really fascinating. Is this oratorio played? Are her string quartets played?
The oratorio, not as much, but the string quartet is quite good, and there are good recordings of the string quartet. She wrote a beautiful piano trio. I think it's one of her best works, which has been recorded pretty widely. But one challenge, and this is why it's so wonderful that someone like you takes an interest in this repertoire. There are good performances out there. There are bad performances out there. And I think we need more subtle musical affecting performances of this repertoire to bring it to a wider audience. That's happening more and more. And that's true not just of her songs, but of her piano works as well. But I think song was her home. She said, "Lieder suit me best." And I think there are many reasons why that was the case, but that to me was her real expressive laboratory where she poured most of her creative energies, although she did other things as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do excuse me, I'm going to do a screen share here. We didn't try this out before, but it sure is going to work. And the next thing you're going to see should be the IDAGIO splash page. Is that what you see, Stephen?
Yes, that's right. What I see.
Now, what I did tonight, I'm using the app. Ladies and gentlemen, just a quick brief. The idagio.com platform is, of course, on the web, but you can have it as an app on your computer, on your iPhone, on your Android, on your iPad, whatever. And what's fun is that whatever you do on your iPad or on your computer or online, it just immediately kicks in. So just to try that, I made myself, and this is the splash page. So you can see some of the new things they're doing, music for your day, composer essentials, and that expands, and you can go on all sorts of, you know, fantastic. These are things that are absolutely only available on the streaming platform of Adagio. It's really quite fun. You can have a lot of fun playing here. But the deal is, if you get one of these things and you find it interesting, then you can put it into a playlist. And so I made a playlist of some songs that you suggested, Stephen. And since I'm sure that Miss Hensel, who we may all know as Miss Mendelssohn, wouldn't it be nice? Which of these songs? Oh, can we listen to the Über allen Gipfeln ist Ruhe?
Yes.
This might be one of the most important poems of Goethe in the 19th century, and certainly one most loved. And probably you could do an entire Lieder evening of just this poem in various settings. I certainly don't recommend that, but you could. Let's have a listen to Fanny Hensel's Über allen Gipfeln ist Ruhe. And I'm going to tell you right now, I am not going to play the whole thing, which is really disgusting, but we have to break it off. But anyway, let's have a listen. I forgot that it was actually and you can see I pulled down this window, ladies and gentlemen. This is these little three ellipses will, you can save it to collection or make your playlist, or even this on this point, we would remove it. And this chevron gives you the full information. So we did in fact hear Nora Friedrichs and Rania Schirmer perform this song. So that's a little bit of how to play with Adagio. We'll come back to it. Let me go back out here. Now, that's interesting. That just as a moment about that song, it is really interesting being, completely possessed by song. And I'm in Heidelberg teaching. I have a Lied Academy here in the Heidelberg Frühling, but it's the Heidelberg International Lied Academy. And I've got 7 or 8 of my young scholars and singers that I've been with now for about a year in different contexts. And we're having a lot of fun. And it's interesting. I didn't have a Fanny Hensel song, but we did have a Clara Schumann song, Ist gekommen durch Sturm und Regen, which is quite fun. But at the same time, we always have a lot of Schumann, and we had Robert Schumann's setting of Über allen Gipfeln und Ruhe I think it's Opus 90. And what was very interesting is that we were able to have a wonderful discussion in this poem and what happens in music, which in fact, you can actually, what it would be interesting, at least maybe a half a recital, at least a lecture recital of some sort, because you get to decide whether the composer thought that was going to happen, that the roux was where you were singing because of the roux, or you were singing because you were hoping you would get to the roux, or you were singing because you want to make sure that whoever's listening is getting the roux, as it were. And roux, by the way, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, über allen Gipfeln ist roux, is all over all the treetops, is peace. And the standalone meaning of the poem is one of the great humanistic universal statements of existence, quite frankly. It's a very compact poem. It's obviously always a very short piece of music, but it's extraordinary, the different composers' personal take on this poem. And I'm only being hesitant because I don't want to make it sound like it's at all contrived by these various composers. I think Fanny took the universal statement clear, although at the very end there's some kind of ambiguousness that comes into it. Robert Schumann's setting is clearly a Sehnsucht, a longing for something that is at that moment, not the poets or narrators thing. The iconic setting, I keep using that word, but the most important and most beautiful, most famous setting, of course, is Schubert, in which it's just a complete and utter musical, poetic synthesis of the same emotion and context. It's a breathtaking page of music in expression and construction. So, I mean, it's just fun. we're having a little bit of shop talk here and I'm kind of going on, but to give our public a little bit of an idea of all the different layers and facets of even a fairly straight on, simple poetic musical expression. What do you think about all of that? Jump in.
Well, I know those settings really well. I think anyone who knows this poem knows Schubert's setting first and foremost. Of course, there's also a Liszt setting, and then you mentioned Robert Schumann's. I think you're absolutely right. So one of the most fun things about studying this repertoire is that you get to empathize with a composer who's empathizing with a poet, right? The composer is trying to understand, if not the poet, the speaker in the poem, which might not be the poet. What is this person feeling, and how can I express what that person is feeling in music? And then as a music theorist, as an analyst, you're trying to understand, how was Fanny Hensel understanding the emotions of this protagonist in the poem? And each composer can make different decisions. And in this case, this is a perfect example of when Susan did her program with you, I think she cited Graham Johnson, who called these songs one-pagers, right? Like just, this is, I mean, I think it's, I don't actually know, I think it's like 25 measures long. And it's very simple. It's the kind of thing that I can sit and play on the piano as a non-pianist and sing along with it. It, I think on first blush, sounds like maybe like a song where the roux, the rest, is all around us and we found it. But when you listen and look more carefully, there are these moments of not disturbance, but kind of slight instability that make this one pager so expressive for all that it contains very few notes. And some of the things that she's doing, without getting too detailed, it doesn't start on a chord with the root in the bass. It doesn't start on a stable chord. It starts at an unstable place. The first time the word Ruhe comes in, über allen Gipfeln ist Ruhe, on that word, there's a chromatic chord that's totally unexpected. And then at the end of the song, when she sings Balde ruhest du auch, at that moment, you expect a moment of rest, and the chords don't do what you want them to do. And in fact, in music theory speak, this song has not a single cadence in the tonic. There's not one.
I listened to it for the first time. That's interesting. That's what gave me this ambiguous feeling about it.
I think that's what you were feeling is the product of the fact that there is not a single authentic cadence, a strong 5/1 cadence in the song. So it sounds beautiful and calm and comforting, but it's not. So I think of this as a song that actually looks forward to the Ruhe that has not yet arrived, that is sort of beyond the final bar of the song. And what's astonishing to me is that she can do this with 24 measures, you know, that she can do it with very few materials. And she has songs, and we can listen to some that are much more effusive, that are even virtuosic. But every once in a while you'll encounter a song that's very small, very simple, very straightforward, but the depths are immense. And this is just one of those songs.
It would be fun. I mean, just to tease people, who am I talking to? You know, to have a show where you just play a bunch of songs and talk, and at the end tell you who the composers were. And it would be rather shocking. I'm sure we could make quite a program that you can't be serious. That person or that gender or that nationality wrote that song. I mean, that could be, you know, there are plenty of German songs written by non-German people, and well, actually, I could do that in the American idiom quite nicely. I mean, I could drop the needle on Charles Griffiths songs, and people wouldn't know where that came from. They would think it's Hugo Wolf or Young Fitzner or something like that, and there you are. So it's, you know, that again, as you said before, it's the value and the beauty of the song. I find the ambiguousness of this really quite touching. Do you have another one off the top of your head that we should listen to? Let's go back to our list here. What would be example of the more active song that maybe there could be fun?
Let's do Bergeslust.
Yeah, that sounds good. Is that your typical Wanderlied, as it were? And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I don't mean to assume that you all speak German. Balde ruhest du auch means soon you will also rue. You will also have peace. And I think what we're really talking about is the response to whether that is a now situation or a future certainty, or a longing for that which you can only hope to have. And those are some of the various perspectives. And the composers always reacted to that, again, in different ways. Bergeslust, with one of my favorite colleagues on the planet, also a earlier victim of IDAGIO Live chit-chats with Thomas Hampson, Diana Damrau, and most esteemed colleague, pianist Helmut Deutsch. We'll hear a little bit. How long is this one? I don't know. We'll see. If it's not too long, we'll go on through. It's Opus 10. Bergeslust, which literally means the mountainous desire, if that's the right. In fact, it was recorded. Look at that. In 2006 in Schwarzenberg, Angelike Kaufmannssaal. That is the famous Schubertiad in Austria, and near the city of Schwarzenberg, and a wonderful hall and a wonderful series and festival every spring and also in the fall. So let's hear a live recording. Bergeslust, Fanny Hensel, Damrau, and Deutsch.
Lust vom Berg zu schauen, weit über Wald und Strom, hoch über sich den blauen, den klaren Himmelsdom, hoch über sich den blauen, den klaren Himmelsdom. Vom Berge Vögel fliegen und Wolken so geschwind, Gedanken überfliegen die Vögel und den Wind. Gedanken überfliegen senkt sich gleich. Gedanken gehen und fliehen, wir sehen das Himmelreich. Gedanken gehen, wir sehen das Himmelreich. Gedanken gehen und wieder fort bis ins Himmelreich. Fort bis ins Himmelreich.
Oh, that's fun. That's really quite. That's really quite. Let me hang on. Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, good for you, Diana and Helmut. Beautiful performance. That sounds a little bit like Musenzone, doesn't it? Schubert. In fact, I was sitting here thinking, what if somebody just dropped that needle? As we drop the needle, by the way, betrays my age. I have a great record.
I listen to records too.
Exactly. I love records. I have a huge record collection. So, dropping the needle, ladies and gentlemen, is, if you just drop the needle on top of the record player, I guess in modern speak we would say, at what bit you joined it, either on your computer or your streaming or your CD. But nevertheless, if you drop the needle, I was just really sitting here thinking, what would I think it was a Schubert song? What would make me think, well, no, it has to be a little later than the 19th century. I certainly wouldn't come up necessarily with the right composer, but even it's funny. It sounds kind of typically Schubertian, but not.
I agree. I think this sounds. She knew Schubert's music. Interestingly, she didn't know Robert Schumann's music very well, and didn't like it, which is really interesting because I hear elements of Schumann, but she really admired Schubert's music, and I think this sounds very Schubertian, with a kind of pictorial accompaniment, with the second part of the song moves into the minor mode and then modulates. It seems like a very kind of Schubertian thing. But what I love about this piece, it really shows the contrast in her style. It shows that she can really fly. She can really make a piece soar.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of virtuosity in this piece, not just for the singer, which is obvious, but there's a lot of complex stuff going on in that pictorial accompaniment that requires real facility, and she had that.
You can see that and see the chord structure in the hands. It's not like tonic, fum fatani, that kind of thing. that there's something else going on. It's interesting you say that about. In my mind, I'm going to profess something here, or confess something. In sort of my ordering of music and composers, I tend to put the musical language of extended Schubert into the Mendelssohn world, and Schumann almost becomes kind of a different road,
Mm-hmm.
and not just for songs, but just in general. I find that the Felix Mendelssohn symphonies seem to me an outgrowth of the Schubertian style, or the Schubertian sound, as it were. But we don't need to waste time on that. And we're going to get to Schumann soon enough. But the Fanny songs, I was also thinking to myself, think, oh, Fanny songs, and you can see somebody, and you can see maybe somebody being deprecating about these kinds of silly little songs that people sing. But I'm telling you what, you have to have a singer like Diana Damrau to pull that off. That's like you say, virtuosic. That's a pretty tough little song to sing. You got to have some serious, as we say, chops.
Yeah.
That's a Turo.
Well, it's interesting. This is there's a really interesting story around this song. It has the very light quality. It's about a joy for wandering. Right. It doesn't seem particularly troubled. It happens to be the last piece of music that she ever wrote. She wrote it, I believe this is true, she wrote it the day before she had a stroke. She was at the piano rehearsing for a performance in her home, and she had a stroke and then died the next day later. And this piece was written the day before that. And it was not published in her lifetime, but it was published posthumously in a collection of songs that Felix put together before he died. So what he does is go back to her earlier songs. And of course, some of your viewers may know this, he was a little ambivalent about her pursuing a career as a professional composer.
I think
he withheld full kind of joyous sanction of that until later. He did, though, think her music was wonderful. And then after she dies, he's just heart-stricken and pulls together a number of her pieces and publishes them posthumously. And this is one of those pieces. And just to think about, a song about the joys of wandering. This is a woman who did not have the freedom to wander, to travel, to see the world the way her brother did. Yes, it's a beautiful, joyous song. There's no kind of cloud over it. But again, if you think of it in context, as I was saying before, this is written by a woman who did not have the freedom to travel the way the speaker of the poem does and the way her brother does, and feels a great freedom in her own life when she finally starts publishing her music a year before she dies. It's like the wind is in her sails and she seems to feel better than she ever has before, writes this beautiful song, dies, and then her brother memorializes it and her in a posthumous collection. The threads are just dense, and untangling them makes this an even more moving piece of music.
Two questions come to mind.
Yeah.
Was she prematurely young to have died of a stroke?
She was 41 when she died, so
it's hard to say for that. Obscenely premature.
Relatively young.
I mean, that's just way early.
It's way early, and she felt that she was still young, and there's a passage in her diaries where she says something like, so she's just started publishing her music and she's getting good reviews, and she says, it's so wonderful to experience this joy, this affection from the public, finally at an age at which most women will not have experienced it, if they ever experience it at all. So she recognizes that most women did not have the freedom, did not have the opportunity to share their music with a wider public. And she knows that I finally get to do it at a middle age, not really at an old age. And then she dies very suddenly, and her brother dies 6 months later. So the history around these pieces is really rich and often very sad, very heartrending.
Was Felix so young when he died?
Felix was, let's see, he was 4 years, is that right? 4 years younger than her. So he was 36 or so. I'm sure Mendelssohn scholars will tell me that I'm wrong on the exact date, but he was quite young as well.
I didn't realize he was so young when he died. Isn't that something? What an extraordinary prodigy. You know, the stories of Zelter showing old man Goethe, this extraordinary young musician. You know, it's unimaginable. Was there tension between Fanny and Felix about her writing music, or was he just concerned that this was not going to turn out very well for her as a woman?
Again, it's complicated. Some have painted Felix as kind of a villain who, stood in her way. I don't think that's true at all. I think he was in some ways trying to protect her from the big bad world of composition. Although he does also at some point say that, I think he says she has neither the drive nor the talent, I think, for authorship, which when you read that, you think that he could have perhaps been more supportive of her. And in fact, her husband was a wonderfully supportive person who encouraged her compositional efforts and wrote to Felix in the 1830s and said, I can convince her of pretty much anything, but when it comes to her publishing her music, you're the final word. Could you maybe encourage her to do this? And it wasn't until 1846 that he finally said, I sort of give you my blessing to do this. So there was some tension, but at the same time, they were kindred spirits. They shared music with one another. He at one point says that he's so upset that after her marriage, she doesn't have as much time to compose, because he says she has composed some wonderful songs, and among them are the best songs that we have. Wow. So he really recognized that her music, her songs in particular, were some of the best lieder that were out there. But he also knew what it was like to be a professional composer, and he knew the challenges she faced.
One of the great instances of her song was Barbara Bunny. And we were singing around each other and with each other a lot. I remember her talking about it. She made a record, I believe, didn't she? And she did some of the Hensel and Schumann songs with Ashkenazi, which was, anything, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, anything that Barbara Bunny recorded, have a listen. It's just absolutely wonderful. She's a wonderful, wonderful singer. But that was the first time that actually came across my radar that one, Felix had a sister, and two, she was quite a composer. Now, have you had, just to wrap Fanny and move over to Claire for a quick minute, have you finished your book on Fanny Hensel, or are you in the middle of it, or what's the status of it?
I have just, so I'm editing a collection of essays essays that's called, it's not a very sexy title, it's called The Songs of Fanny Hensel, which is coming out from Oxford University Press.
Great.
And it is, the press has everything, the proofs have been finished, and it is being printed, and it's supposed to come out in December or January. And it's a wonderful book with essays by Susan Ewens, Harold Krebs, Scott Burnham, Larry Todd, just a wonderful group of people who know this repertoire really deeply. And again, it was fun to do something collaborative. I talked about collaborative projects earlier. So it's coming out in January.
In January. We had Susan on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I told her that you were coming. She said, "Oh, be sure and ask him about Fanny Hensel." You know, I said, "I'm assuming that's on the top of the list." Are you writing a book, or have you written a book about Clara Schumann?
I am currently writing a book on Clara Schumann. So the Hensel book is done and coming out soon. And I have a book contract from Cambridge University Press to write a book on Clara Schumann songs specifically. And I have written, oh gosh, the book will have about 8 chapters, and I've written 3 and I'm moving into the 4th. So my goal is to have that book done by the end of the summer. But when it comes out, who knows, it could be quite a while. But I'm currently, having wrapped up the Hensel project, I'm buried happily in Clara Schumann songs at the moment.
I love it. Wait, now to go now just quickly, if one's looking for the songs themselves to learn and to sing, is there a book of Fanny Hensel songs?
There are books of Fanny Hensel songs. So as I said, she wrote 249, and I have a graduate student who, by the way, deserves a shout out. His name is Tyler Osborne, who's finishing a wonderful Fanny Hensel dissertation on not just her songs, but her instrumental music. And he has, without my prodding him to do it, engraved all of her songs. And we've discovered that about 100 of the 249 are not published. So many are available. There is not a critical edition. Okay. And he and I, along with Susan actually, have been dreaming of, if not making a huge critical edition of all of them, which would be, I think we need that and it would be a big undertaking, but finding some wonderful gems among those 100 unpublished songs and getting another book of songs out there, because they're every time I look through them, I scroll through the PDF that I'm so lucky to have of unpublished pieces, and I find one and think, how is this piece not known? Like, how is this extraordinary piece of music not performed, not published, and perhaps something that was not heard since like 1823? It's her unpublished songs include some amazing pieces that deserve to be out there. And if readers are if listeners are interested, Tyler Osborne is the sort of the keeper of the keys to the kingdom. He has them all, and we're trying to get them out.
If we just Google, as they say, Google Tyler Osborne, we'll find his work.
I think if you type,
hold that thought. I have a much better idea. Give us a couple of weeks and you can find out anything you need to know by going to hamsongfoundation.org and clicking either on our conversation or the backup. We will make this available. It will be available where to go and where to find this information. I promise you we'll do that. This is the fun thing about revisiting people on the same passion. That just is too good a story. We should try and help find some publishers, or if people were showing interest in the outliers, if it were, or just generally in Fanny Hensel, I'm sure there'd be more accessibility to it. Is it available on IMSLP?
So she has several published opuses. She published 2 opuses before she died of songs. There are others as well of different other genres. And then 2 opuses of songs were published by her brother posthumously after she died. Those are available on IMSLP, and those are great. But that's just like, you know, a small slice of her vast output. So there's a wonderful Breitkopf edition. There are 2 volumes of her songs. I think if anyone is enticed, intrigued, and wants to get their hands on scores, I would buy the Breitkopf scores, which, again, it's just a fraction of her output, but they're wonderful, and it's a pretty good representative sampling.
We'll make a little splash sheet where we house this conversation, and people, we can help you all find these songs if you're looking for them. That's great. Let's move to Clara. Was Clara on your radar in a big way before Fanny, or did they come at the same time, or were you a Schumann guy and kind of found your way to Clara? I think a lot of us didn't know that Clara was such a wonderful song composer for quite some time. And I mean, truly wonderful. And the musicologist is a little bit, you can, if you read early writings about the two of them, you can read some pretty nonsense stuff that's been leveled at Clara. And of course, there's the famous opus where they wrote together, was it opus 30 or 7 or something like that, where, you know, Robert writes that they actually, you know, in love, and they were finally living together. And so they wrote this opus of songs in which, you know, he wrote some, she wrote some, they wrote together, so forth. And the writings about those songs can really be pretty offensive, you know. It's like, well, you know, the good bits were obviously Robert, and you know, but Clara's not without inspiration. I found it all. And actually, we were working on some Clara Schumann songs, and the rest of the group didn't really register who this is from, and so we just sort of took a vote. You know, is this a top level song or not? I mean, do you guys really think this? Oh yes, it's fantastic. I've never heard it. Yeah. It's Clara Schumann, and even part of the kommt durch Sturm und Regen. I think there's even some musicologists that have maintained that, well, yeah, but the actual theme came from Robert. But he doesn't write that way, and he's very honest and open. Why do they make assumptions because they think motivically they can decide that? I just, you know, it's a good song, and I don't, you know, it's wonderful. Boom, done.
This is one of the big challenges, I think, of writing about not just women composers, but especially women composers like Fanny Hensel and Clara Schumann, who were so intimately tied to male figures in their lives. So it's with Fanny, it's of course her brother, and Clara, it's her husband. And you can't deny the connections. I mean, Clara wrote almost all of her songs during the years in which she was married. And then after Robert died, she wrote one more piece of music in 40 years. And it was a 4-hand piano piece for a friend's 50th wedding anniversary. So yes, they're intimately connected, but you're right that with Clara, you encounter, there's a passage I can think of, I won't say who wrote it, but the line is, if you look at those songs that were published in the same opus together, if you look at Clara's songs, they betray a master touch, which is not hers, is the line. The idea being that...
I think that's Eric Sams. But
you may be right.
The book on Schumann is, of course, in so many ways definitive, and he was a great, great musicologist without question, and who am I? But he could be highly opinionated. And
my point is not to be too hard on Eric Sams, but to suggest that it's very easy to assume that the wonderful songs she wrote must have been songs that he helped her edit, or that she was borrowing from him or influenced by him. And yes, she was, but one of the things I'm trying to do in this book is not completely uncouple her from Robert Schumann, because you can't do that, but to take her songs on their own terms, to treat them as I said before, as wonderful pieces of music, and try to understand what is her songwriting style like. And yes, it has some similarities with Robert's, but it's her own. She was her own composer. And I think we elevate her as a composer if we recognize that.
I have come across evidences, being somewhat of a Schumann scholar in the songs, where it's clear that Clara was part of the editing process. And it's not hard to imagine that she was even admonishing to Robert that perhaps the rather modern way that he was starting to set text, which is in some cases astonishingly modern, that we tend to overlook. I mean, in 1840, Robert Schumann was writing the German text in a natural flow of the syntax of the language, like no composer had even tried to do. And I have a feeling, I just have the feeling somebody was trying to say, well, Robert, that's terrific for a violin, but you can't do that for a voice. And I've always had a bit of a suspicion, because we know when they worked and the editing process, and he trusted her implicitly. And of course, Robert's then frustration that his pieces that he wrote in such a flurry, especially in the big 1840, that they didn't get published quick enough. So there was this, I've got to get this published feeling, or I'm going to lose my grip. All those mitigating factors have always.
It looks like we may have lost Thomas. We'll wait and hope he returns. I'm told they're trying to get him back, so if you'll just bear with us. So maybe I'll continue the conversation we were having about Clara Schumann and her relationship with Robert Schumann. As I mentioned, she composed her songs only during the years that she was married, with some exception. She wrote some songs when she was younger, and that means that her output of songs is actually quite small. Compared with Fanny Hensel, for example, who composed 249 songs, Clara Schumann composed 27 songs. Ah, it looks like he's coming back. We're just reconnecting.
All right, are you there?
I am there. I am here.
You know, when you think life is stable, your battery runs out. I have it plugged in here. Something I just sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen, and so much for I was hoping to go into Clara Schumann, but anyway, as I was saying in mid-sentence, a question. Hopefully you just kept on going as if the lights went off in your lecture room.
I don't know that I was so fluid, but I started explaining something and then you came back.
Oh, do explain. What were you talking about?
Well, I was just saying that one difference between Fanny Hensel and Clara Schumann is that Fanny Hensel wrote 249 songs, and Clara Schumann, by my count, wrote 27 songs.
Really? So few.
So few. And in part, that's because she composed almost all of them. There were some she wrote when she was younger, but most of them are during the years that she was married. Robert was encouraging her in many ways. And then after he died, you know, she had a big performing career. She had 8 kids, 6 of whom lived into adulthood. One died, and I think when he was quite young. And so she had to raise her family and her kids and their kids. So she had to continue her performing career. And that means that her song output is quite small. But lest we think that means it's not good, quite the contrary. I find that looking at these songs, there's a friend I know, a scholar, who says that looking at her songs feels like going through a gallery of well-curated artworks. Like there must be 600 and these are the 27 best of the 600, but they're just the 27 we have, but they're extraordinary pieces. And I think she really deserves to be treated as a serious song composer, even though for all the reasons I mentioned, she didn't have the freedom or the time to write music after her husband died.
Well, you mentioned that you said earlier that it was, you know, she didn't write much, or if anything really of significance, after Robert died. But I remember quite clearly after Robert died, her professional life was quite huge, and she was also, you know, very close to Brahms, and there's a great deal of musical fruition. But that you're saying that post Robert, that was pretty much performance, and because he was known as an enormous virtuoso and so forth. But she wasn't composing music after that time.
Not really. I mean, as I said, there's one piece that she wrote several years after he died, but she basically stopped composing after he died. And many scholars have wondered, why did this happen? There are many reasons. But I think the conclusion we shouldn't draw is that she didn't take composing seriously or didn't pour all of her efforts into what she wrote. At some point, when she's writing her last set of songs, she talks about the hours of self-forgetfulness that she experiences when she's breathing and living in the world of sound. And she's talking about writing music, not just performing music. She's just put the final touches on some songs, and it was immensely important for her to be writing music. So I think we should not conclude that her songs are not worthy of our attention, or that she didn't take them seriously just because she couldn't keep writing music. She didn't have the time to do so after her husband died. And as you noted, she was spending so much time trying to get his music out there, editing his music, performing his music, and kind of carrying on his legacy.
Right. Well, okay, these are these are a couple of the giants of the early 19th century. What other lady composers come to mind that you think have been unduly neglected?
Oh, there are so many. Just sticking with German lieder, Josefina Lang is a great composer, wonderful composer. Johanna Kinkel is a terrific composer. Every time I encounter her songs, I find wonders that I didn't know about. One composer that Susan Ewens directed me toward, Robert Franz's wife. Her maiden name is Marie Hinrichs, H-I-N-R-I-C.
Oh, yes, she told me about that.
And she published an opus 1, her only opus, before she was married. And then after they got engaged, it's in some ways similar to to Clara, although it was after Robert died, and it's similar to so many female composers. She stopped writing music altogether, and her Opus 1 is wonderful. It's a wonderful little collection of songs that in some ways it's like the first Hensel song we looked at, where every note counts. Everything is very contained and spare and small, but every note speaks volumes. And I think that opus deserves to be known and written about, even though it's the only one she ever wrote. So those are just a few examples, but there are many, many others.
I'm passionate about Robert Franz himself, who used to be enormously popular. In fact, literally 1/3 of Lotte Lehmann's final recital in Town Hall in the 50s were Robert Franz songs. And of course, Wagner thought a great deal of him. Liszt kept him alive with charity concerts because he was essentially broke and destitute at the end of his life, which is extraordinary. But they're beautiful, beautiful, wonderful songs. I did not know that about his wife. Wonderful. And on into the turn of the century.
Well, another composer a leader composer that deserves more attention is Alma Mahler, who wrote some extraordinary songs that were published and known. Although here again, she had a very complicated life. History has not always looked kindly on her, but I think the story is much more complicated. She was a gifted musician who wrote some wonderful songs and then stopped writing songs, but we shouldn't therefore conclude that she wasn't a gifted musician. I encountered a review of a great book on Alma Mahler by, I can't remember the title, but the author is Kate Haste, like running fast, Haste, which is a more sympathetic portrait of the woman and her music. And the reviewer, who happened to be a man, said, we can't conclude that Alma Mahler took composition seriously because after all, she never wrote a symphony. And I read that and I thought, well, as a woman living in her time, she didn't have the opportunity to write a symphony. So there are so many roadblocks and prejudices that I think we need to try to move over.
The Alma story is complicated. She was without question a gifted musician, but the other side of the story, to try and make her the complete victim of Gustav's admonition that she should take care of the house and his family and him, and that leave the composing to him. People react to that in different modern ways, and certainly it's harsh. On the other hand, I think that her music compositorial, to sort of make that sound as if he ruined her life as a major composer is certainly wrong. But that some momentum was lost in her early days and her passion about writing song, which manifests itself, as you say, in a small collection of really extraordinary songs. And even if you take the ones that Mahler himself said in his story, that he brought him out of an old trunk and edited them for her, cleaned them up, and handed them to her as a gift, there's other songs, and that's we can take her at her word, and they're quite beautiful songs. They're not Gustav Mahler Nachma, renditions or miniatures. They're understandable. I think that's interesting. In America, I've always been really quite enthusiastic about Marion Bauer. Part of that is because she comes from my hometown, Walla Walla, Washington.
I did not know.
The town where my mother and sister live, which I've always found kind of humorous. And she had an enormous life. I mean, from Walla Walla, Washington, became this in complete, colleague in arms with Aaron Copland, and founded the first organization for modern music in America with him, and so forth and so on. But she wrote beautiful, beautiful songs.
She did, and there are a number of her composers sort of moving into the 20th century. One of my favorite composers is a song composer who wrote many other things, is Florence Price. There's a Florence Price song called, you should have, people who are watching, you should listen to Daryl Taylor's, he's a countertenor, his performance of a song of hers called Night, which is just like, it just melts you when you listen to it. It's an extraordinary piece of music.
Florence Price and Margaret Bonds are just two of the really great song composers. And yes, they're women, and yes, they're African American, but they're first and foremost just really incredible composers. And I did my songs from Chicago. I have both of those ladies on there, and it was a privilege to get to know their music. This is a fun. We could talk shop for quite some time, even given my technological burps and hiccups this evening. My computer is still dark, so I'm fearful that it's more than just battery. But never mind, I'll get it back together here pretty soon. And your book sounds fascinating. Good luck with the Clara Schumann research. I think that's going to be very well received. We will give you, ladies and gentlemen, some links on the Hampson Foundation.org for Fanny Hensel. Nee, Hensel, geboren Mendelssohn Bartholdy, Fanny Hensel. Anyway, whatever that wonderful story is. This has been a wonderful conversation, especially about these two giants of music and their connections. Thank you so much for joining us. Anything else you just want to, why? I guess I can ask you the question I asked Susan Yuan. Why is all this important?
Why is all this important? I feel like listening is very important. And I don't mean just listening to music, but listening to other people, understanding where they come from. I don't mean to make it tied too much to the present moment, but especially now we need to listen very carefully to other people and try to empathize with them. And I feel like listening to these songs means listening carefully to the composers who have been hidden for far too long and whose voices need to be uplifted, listening to the poets that they were understanding, listening to the people who heard their music and shaped what they wrote. So in my mind, why is this important? It's kind of like an act of empathy to really listen carefully to these voices, particularly voices that deserve to be heard. And as you know, the canon of Western classical music is predominantly white and male. And there's extraordinary music in that canon, but there are so many amazing voices that need to be lifted up and heard. And one thing that kind of gets me up in the morning is hoping that in some very small way with this research, I can lift up some voices that have been silenced for too long.
You have, and what a wonderful way to close out our conversation this evening. Thank you much, Stephen Rodgers. Thank you much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience with my technical ineptitude. I look forward to seeing you all next week, and I look forward to talking to you more often than we have in the past, Stephen. It's just wonderful. Likewise. Good luck with everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. All the best.